I think in a lot of ways, people want there to be a magic bullet of sorts to get into comics. Like if you just do this one thing, then you'll be in comics. And in some cases, the structure of comics has made it so that if you make just the one right friend or you get the one right contact, then they'll help get you into comics. At least that's a promise some of the people have been made. I don't know that it actually is that true. Certainly, friends of friends are able to get into positions that maybe arguably they shouldn't have, but that kind of dangling promise of you buddy up to me, I'll get you in, has been used and abused quite a bit. We've all been hearing about that. But in terms of comics, there is one kind of magic thing you can do to make sure you have some kind of career in comics. It's just, you got to know what you're signing up for. I'm going to explain what it is. Hey, everybody, this is Perch. This is going to sound like kind of the most, obvious common sense thing possible, and maybe even a little bit too simple, but it's true. Now, having kind of been in and around and with many friends in the comic industry for decades, there's a lot of wacky stories. There's, this person who's done with this weird thing, or this person who's done, or that, whatever. There's lots of stories out there. But if you want to get into comics, if you really want to create comics and you want to build your career, be known at a bigger level, there's really one surefire way to do it. There may be a lot of shortcuts, but there's risks with them. Many of them don't pan out. Some of it you're gambling. But if you want a 100% success rate, the trick is to make comics. Start making a comic. Now, 20 years ago, the trouble was, even if you made your own comic, it might be kind of tricky to get it printed. There wasn't the same amount of services back then there are today. And then getting it distributed was even harder. There wasn't an Amazon. There weren't places to take your comic. There was no digital avenue. There was no kind of cheap publishing outlet. There was make some comics, print them up yourself, take them to maybe a comic convention, try and sell them, on the street or hand them out over there and hope to build your career that way. And if people were determined and did that, then eventually they would have a career in comics. Even if they weren't that talented, they'd have a career in comics. Today, good news, there's a lot of ways you can get your comic out into the world. You can certainly use crowdfunding. You can certainly use one of the many digital platforms which have a pretty low to zero barrier of entry. There are gatekeepers, in quotes, in comics, people who will try and prevent your comic from getting out there. But as long as you're determined and have your own plan, nobody can stop you. They can certainly stop you from getting in at Marvel, but getting in at Marvel is not the only route to success. In fact, arguably, it's becoming less and less of an interesting route. In the 2019 sales numbers, a lot of people are happy because it's saying that the comic book business, the industry overall, hit a record milestone. It's up high. Adjusted for inflation, it's easily where the 90s were, the best parts of the 90s, not the lousy, crappy parts of the 90s people don't like to talk about. That's good news. But if you dig into those numbers a little bit more, if you actually start to dissect them, what you'll find is the vast majority of those are being run by what they call graphic novel sales. And if you dig a little further into that, the graphic novel sales, the big dollars that are attached to this stuff, isn't coming out of Marvel or DC. It's coming out of stuff out of Scholastic. It's coming out of other deals. That's where the big growth is happening. The big two traditional comic publishers are if you, other than raising their prices, other than selling anniversary issues for $10 a pop, they're not growing like these other businesses are growing. Now, before somebody wants to run in here and say, oh, it's this person's talking point or that person's talking point, none of this is bad news. If your heart's set on being in Marvel or DC, then honestly, treading water, those businesses continuing to just pump out comics is good news for you, because if you assemble the right portfolio, have the right skills, go in and do the right things, you still have those businesses are not going away. To the people who say that Marvel and DC are about to implode and they're going to go out of business, go bankrupt, they're going to stop publishing comics, that's not going to happen. So those avenues are still there. But I think the better news is there's a lot more avenues for you. If you want to be in the comic industry, the trick is make a comic, even if it's at a low scale. Here's the hard part that you're going to have to do for yourself. Be ready for your first issue, your first effort, to get zero attention from Bleeding Cool, to not make $1 million on Indiegogo, to not be part of like Joe Quesada, Dan Poseidon. These they're not going to put you on Drink and Draw. You're going to make a comic. Very few people will see it, but you'll have produced it, and then you make your second comic and your third comic. The magic, though, is that once you start making comics, once you actually see things through from start to finish, you've already separated yourself from about 95% of the people who want to enter this industry. Most people never make it that far. They try and take different, easier routes. They try and take shortcuts of how to get into the industry without actually just, gritting their teeth and producing something. If you do that, if you grit your teeth and you produce a comic and you get it out into the world, even if getting it out into the world means you sell it to 25 people or 5, you've taken something from beginning to end, and you now have something in your portfolio. You've built up your resume. As old-fashioned as it sounds, you should keep track of your own background, your own comic book resume. Every time you produce a comic, every time you do a commission, every time you do something that involves starting a project with a blank piece of paper, writing a story or drawing it, printing it, putting it out into the world, sending it to somebody, collecting a check from it, or even if you collect no check at the beginning and you're simply doing this stuff pro bono to get your work out into the world, write it down. Establish your history and keep track of your history. Because if you just do this over the course of 2 to 5 years, you can quickly discover that you've got a decent resume, you've got a decent collection of books. And when you go out to try and sell your project to an independent comic publisher, or maybe somebody new, and one of the exciting things about the 2019 numbers is that you're seeing a lot of new things are starting to bubble out there. I've said before that I don't think crowdfunding is the end of that game. I think this is a middle step. And I think that next step is clearer than ever. That next step is people who have done crowdfunding and successfully delivered, meaning they've run a campaign, produced a book, gotten the book published, it's out there, they've collected money, and they've moved on. Those people have a huge advantage now when talking to other publishers, when talking to other companies. They've shown they can do it. They've got a body of work they could hold. If somebody says, well, let's see what you've done, they don't have to kind of talk about some vague ideas. They don't have to show somebody some tweets. They actually can just hand over a book. I've talked to a number of small publishers, inside of comics and outside of comics, and the most powerful thing in most cases you can do is when you're saying, I'd like to write this project, here's a pitch, here's something I'd like to do. If you can also put on the table something that you've published, big or small, it sets you apart. Right now, that is the 100% chance you have of working in the comic industry. Just do it. The other thing you're going to have to do is a little bit of convincing of yourself. If you sit in your house and you make a comic and you produce it and you hand it out to 5 people, congratulations, you're in the comic industry. Period. Nobody can tell you otherwise. There's lots of people, by the way, on all fronts that will want to explain to you how you're not really that important, how you really haven't done what the big guys have done. That is a trap. All that is trying to get you to do less. That's trying to talk you down from continuing. If you produced a comic, if you produced a sketch, if you've done anything like that, congratulations. You're in the comic industry. Nobody can take that away from you. That's you. And once you've done that, it's easy to keep going. All you have to do is listen more to yourself and less to others. Keep producing comics. Keep putting work out. When somebody asks you what you've done, show them your work. If you want to work for a company, show them your work. If you're going to walk in and talk to somebody from Boom or Vault or anywhere, show them your resume. Show them the work that you've produced. Show them the list. Go to WordPress. Make a cheap and simple website for yourself that just lists your works. As soon as you can put more than one thing on there, as soon as you can put one thing on there, you're on the right track. That's how you make it in the comic industry. Again, there's lots of shortcuts. Maybe if you're really lucky, you can bump into a high level executive, do them a favor, and they'll get you a job. Maybe you happen to work in a comic store with a guy who suddenly made it big in Marvel. Maybe you're going to write for Bleeding Cool and you're going to, put that one trashy article up that tarnishes somebody your enemies don't like, and they let you in as a favor. That's always possible, but it is a long shot, and it's a scummy shot. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, no matter how happy you are, it does matter how you get somewhere. It does matter, what steps you took to get there. You take these steps, honestly, they're easy steps. The hardest part is convincing yourself that you're legit. What do you think? Leave some comments below about jumping into the comic industry, what it means, what you can do about it. And I'm telling you, it's this simple. Hey, like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter or Facebook at Comic Perch. Most importantly, thanks for listening.